Hello, my guidance students. This is Michelle. I'm just going to go through these questions for your Chapter 4 Guide Journal experience. Because we're having interviews this week and next week, I'm just going to have you do your guide journal on the two chapters, Chapter 4 and 5. So I'll go over it really quickly. Of course, you will, I'm assuming you've read the chapter. And there's a lot in the chapter about dreams and imagination. And because a lot of you have talked about wanting to become more imaginative and understand the process more of being imaginative, I'm going to start by having you watch these little tiny 2 to 3 minute videos about early brain development and what happens to begin the process of being able to imagine. So just think of this as a part 1, and then next week I'll do a part 2 to kind of help you understand what the brain is needing in order to develop imaginative qualities in your thinking. So go ahead and look at those. I'm going to reference those in class and also talk more about those in the future. This right here is my main concern, that we start to learn how to be imaginative in hard moments. That's what guidance is really about in relationships to children when they're having their hard moments. And we try to understand those moments and what they really are about and their needs they're trying to meet. And then become more imaginative about how we can join our attention to them in their hard moments. Oftentimes, their hard moments are also ours. So sometimes dealing with those right then and there is not a good idea, because you're having a hard moment, they're having a hard moment. Not exactly the best time to figure it out. So we need to get really creative about that and imaginative. And then when we say to ourselves, but I don't think of myself as being able to be imaginative, oftentimes then we resort to things we already know, and they're common practices that we've either grown up with or understand. So that's just something I want you to think about for now. And now I'm going to dive into Ann Pellow's description about dreams. And she talks a lot about the difference between dreams and imagination and solid practical desires. And I'm going to apply that to the realm of guidance. So I want you to try this little activity. I have an example. A solid practical desire could be a child will stop knocking down the block structures of other children. That's not a dream. That's a practical desire, right? Maybe the dream might be that I have a classroom that's conflict free. So I'm hoping that kind of starts to make sense. And then your response to it is usually what happens to a child that does that is they are removed from the area. They're told they're doing something they're not supposed to do, and it's not nice to do that. That's something that I hear a lot. And so let's go to the dream imagine realm and say, what is this child hoping for? What is this child wanting to do? What does this child imagine they are doing? That's an interesting thought usually. So even if you want to stop what's happening in the moment, this would be an important part of your process to follow up with. You might be able to start getting to this part, this part first. So I'm just trying to kind of get you used to thinking this way. So what's a possible action or approach? Oh, I get it now. The child is seeking some connection with the builder of the structure, or at the same time, loves to see something built up and knocked down. And that's a developmental cognitive need. Okay, what should we do? Now we're using imagination, and we're using what we know the child might be imagining. So it's a little different, and it might require some imagination on our part to have a better response. Sometimes what I used to do when I was a teacher is, and you might remember my solutions books, I would take these things that happen and I would put them on. I had index cards. We didn't have post-it notes back then, but you could use post-it notes. And I would write these little things down, and then in a problem-solving group, I would say, hey, everybody, come on over. I need a solution, and let's be solutionaries. And then they would sit down, and I would say, I wouldn't use names, of course. I would say, sometimes in the block area, it seems like somebody builds something and then somebody else might come along and knock it down. So what can we do about that? And sometimes kids will give you these more typical responses. They need to go sit in timeout, or they need to get out of the block area. So you kind of let those process and say, well, I don't really want to do that. I don't want to send somebody away. What else could we do? So doing that process can help you as a teacher build your imagination. So those of you who have asked me about this, the best way for you to develop your imagination about guidance in particular is to refrain from acting sometimes, or if you can't refrain from acting for various reasons, go back and do this solutionary process and then write down all the good ideas in your solutions book. This is how you become more imaginative also. And at the same time, it builds this environment where you're a collaborator in finding solutions to problems instead of blaming someone. So these things over here, they're usually all about blame. This area is all about solutions. So I'm just going to leave it at that. Now I'm going to have you, sorry about that, that should change that. Sorry about that. Okay, now I want you to answer this question from the middle of page 94. When was the last time you dreamt in a way that had you leaping with expectation and joyfully making music, so delighted that you were imagining this particular thing? And if it was when you were a child, that's fine. So just go ahead and write that down. If you can't think of anything, then just write about that. This is something a lot of you have talked about that you feel you've lost touch with. So you could write about someone else that you saw going through that. Totally your call on that one. And it doesn't have to be long at all, just a few notes. All right, so then part 2 is this idea she has about visions, values, and practice, and I'm kind of combining it with Margie Carter's part at the end of the chapter. So what I'd like you to do is look at these common practices. She talks about the importance of processes being examined, and she looks at the idea that these processes here are what she calls untethered from our values in page 95. That these things here don't actually reflect the values we often have. And think about the exercise Kim Tabler did and the one we did in class, and think about, what is it that we value? So a good leader would ask us why. Why are you doing this if you value this? Why are you doing this if you say you value this? And so we're going to be good pedagogical leaders ourselves. We're going to ask ourselves these questions in this class. That's what we're working on. So I want you to try this activity. You don't need to create the chart. I just mean fill it in. Sorry, it's a little odd wording that I used, but you're on these pages in the chapter 100 to 105 about the Hilltops Center or school. So first you start with the vision they had for children, and you're going to go into Margie Carter's categories: social justice, relationships, practices, and joy. How did Hilltop identify their visions under these 4 categories? What were they? Then, how did they take those visions and create values and practices? So you go through each one of those for the families and then the educators and just fill in those charts. You don't have to use sentences or anything like that. Just notes are fine. If you prefer not to use charts and you just want to list them, you can just get rid of my charts in this document and fill them in that way. That's fine. I just use the charts so that I can organize what I want you to get out of it, and what I know I want you to use in the future when we start creating guidance plans. Okay, I hope this little explanation helps. Let me know if you have questions, and I hope you enjoy this process.